I used to believe that family meant unconditional support, that blood was thicker than water, and that your own sister would never deliberately sabotage your dreams. I thought sibling rivalry was something you outgrew after childhood, not a poison that could seep into your adult life and destroy everything you'd worked for. I was naive. Sometimes the person who shares your DNA can become your cruelest enemy, and the humiliation they inflict can echo through corporate boardrooms and family dinners for years to come. My story isn't just about workplace politics or sibling jealousy, it's about discovering that sometimes your greatest victory comes from the very person who tried to destroy you, underestimating just how strong you really are. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Elena Rodriguez, and 6 months ago I was sitting in the pristine conference room of Morrison Associates Marketing Firm in downtown Chicago, watching my older sister Victoria tear apart my portfolio piece by piece, while a panel of executives nodded along with her critique. Victoria had no idea that the man sitting at the head of that conference table, the CEO who was quietly observing her performance, was the same person who had proposed to me 3 weeks earlier with a vintage sapphire ring and promises of building a life together. She had no idea that her calculated cruelty was being witnessed by someone who loved me more than she ever could. But this story doesn't begin in that conference room. It begins much earlier, in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in South Side Chicago, where 2 little girls learned that in the Rodriguez household, there was only room for one daughter to shine. I was 7 years old when I first understood that Victoria saw me as competition rather than a sister. We were both standing in the living room of our grandmother's house during a family gathering, surrounded by aunts and uncles who had come to celebrate my elementary school art award. The local newspaper had featured my painting of the Chicago skyline, complete with a small article about promising young artists in the community. It should have been a moment of pure childhood joy, but Victoria, who was 10 and already showing signs of the ambition that would define her adult life, couldn't bear to let me have that spotlight alone. "Elena's painting is okay," she announced to the room full of relatives, her voice carrying the kind of casual dismissiveness that cuts deeper than outright cruelty. "But the perspective is all wrong, and the colors don't really match the real skyline. I've been teaching her some techniques, so hopefully her next one will be better." The adults laughed indulgently, praising Victoria for being such a helpful big sister, while I stood there feeling like my accomplishment had been reduced to a charity case requiring her guidance. That night, as we lay in the twin beds we shared in our small bedroom, Victoria turned to me with an expression I would come to know well over the years. "Elena," she said in the patient tone of someone explaining something obvious to a slow child, "you need to understand something important. I'm going to be successful someday. Really successful. I'm going to work for big companies and make important decisions. You're creative and that's nice, but creative people usually struggle. I don't want you to get your hopes up too high and then be disappointed when things don't work out the way you imagine they will." Even at 7, I could sense that Victoria's words weren't coming from a place of sisterly concern. There was something calculating in her tone, something that suggested she was trying to plant seeds of doubt rather than protect me from future disappointment. But I was too young to understand the full implications of what she was doing, and too trusting to recognize that my own sister might be threatened by my potential for success. Our mother, Carmen Rodriguez, was a hard-working woman who cleaned offices downtown to support us after our father left when I was 5. She worked long hours and came home exhausted, with little energy left to navigate the complex dynamics between her daughter. When she did notice tension between Victoria and me, she usually attributed it to normal sibling rivalry and encouraged us to work things out ourselves. "Girls," she would say with the weary patience of a single mother juggling too many responsibilities, "you only have each other. Family is everything, and someday you'll understand how important it is to support each other." Carmen's words about family loyalty became a refrain that shaped how I viewed my relationship with Victoria throughout our childhood and adolescence. No matter how cutting Victoria's comments became, no matter how often she dismissed my achievements or made me feel inadequate, I internalized the message that sisters were supposed to stick together, and that Victoria's behavior was just her way of trying to help me improve. Victoria excelled academically from an early age, earning straight A's and leadership positions in student government, that fed her natural inclination toward control and authority. She was accepted to Northwestern University on a partial scholarship, where she studied business administration with a focus on marketing and brand management. Victoria's college years were a masterclass in networking and strategic relationship building. She joined the right sororities, interned with prestigious companies, and cultivated connections that would serve her career for years to come. Meanwhile, I found my passion in graphic design and visual communications, spending hours creating digital artwork and learning design software that fascinated me in ways that traditional academic subjects never had. My high school art teachers encouraged me to pursue design professionally, recognizing that I had both natural talent and the technical skills that modern design work required. When I was accepted to the Illinois Institute of Art with a scholarship for promising design students, Victoria's reaction was predictably dismissive. "Art school," she said with the kind of skeptical tone people usually reserved for discussing pyramid schemes or get-rich-quick plans. "Elena, you do realize that design is an incredibly competitive field with very few stable career opportunities, right? You'll be competing with thousands of other creative people for freelance projects that barely pay enough to cover rent. Maybe you should consider something more practical, like communications or business, so you'll have a backup plan when the art thing doesn't work out." Victoria's constant predictions of my professional failure became background noise that I learned to tune out while focusing on developing my skills and building a portfolio that showcased my ability. During college, I worked part-time at a small design firm learning the practical aspects of client relationships and project management that complemented my artistic education. I also began freelancing for local businesses, creating logos and marketing materials that helped me understand how design could serve broader business objectives. After graduation, I was hired by Meridian Creative Solutions, a mid-sized design agency that specialized in branding for technology companies and startups. The work was challenging and rewarding, allowing me to combine my artistic skills with strategic thinking about how visual communication could influence consumer behavior and brand perception. Over the course of 3 years at Meridian, I worked on campaigns for several high-profile clients and earned recognition for innovative approaches to digital branding. Victoria, meanwhile, had graduated from Northwestern and immediately landed a position with a prestigious marketing firm in downtown Chicago. She climbed the corporate ladder with the same determination she had shown in college, earning promotions and expanding her responsibilities until she became a senior account executive with her own team and major clients. Victoria's success was impressive and legitimate, but she never missed an opportunity to remind me that her achievements in business were more substantial and financially rewarding than anything I could accomplish in the creative industry. During family gatherings, Victoria would dominate conversations with stories about her latest client victories, her expanding responsibilities, and her growing salary. When relatives asked about my work, Victoria would often interrupt with comments like, "Elena does really pretty designs for small companies. It's nice creative work, but obviously the scale is much smaller than what I'm dealing with in corporate market." Her tone was always supportive enough to avoid seeming openly hostile, but dismissive enough to make it clear that she viewed my career as a hobby rather than a serious professional pursuit. The dynamic between us reached a new level of tension when I started dating David Morrison, a successful entrepreneur who had built his own marketing firm from the ground up. David and I met at a networking event for Chicago creative professionals, where he was speaking about the intersection of design and business strategy. He was intelligent, ambitious, and genuinely interested in my work in ways that felt refreshing after years of Victoria's dismissive comments about my career prospects. David's company, Morrison Associates, had grown rapidly over the past 5 years, earning recognition as one of Chicago's most innovative marketing firms. They specialized in integrated campaigns that combined traditional marketing strategies with cutting-edge digital design, exactly the kind of work that bridged my creative background with larger business objectives. As David and I began dating, I learned about his vision for expanding the company and his belief that great design was essential to effective marketing. Our relationship developed naturally over several months of dinners, art gallery visits, and long conversations about our respective careers and ambitions. David was supportive of my work in ways that felt genuine rather than patronizing, asking thoughtful questions about my design process and offering insights from his business experience that helped me think about my work in new ways. When he proposed after 18 months of dating, I felt like I had found a partner who understood both my creative passion and my professional ambition. I hadn't told Victoria much about David during our courtship. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Partly because I had learned over the years that sharing good news with her often led to subtle attempts to diminish my happiness or find problems where none existed. When I finally introduced them at a family dinner celebrating our engagement, Victoria's reaction was predictably competitive. She immediately began interrogating David about his business, his client base, and his expansion plans with the kind of aggressive networking energy that made family gatherings feel like professional conference. "So David," Victoria said during dessert, her voice carrying the confident tone of someone accustomed to being the most successful person in any room. "Elena mentioned that you run a marketing firm. That's interesting. I work in marketing too, for Henderson and Associates. We're one of the largest firms in the city, handling major national accounts. What kind of clients does your company typically work with?" David answered her questions politely, describing Morrison Associates' focus on integrated campaigns for mid-market companies and emerging brands. Victoria listened with the kind of attentive interest that suggested she was evaluating his business, rather than simply making conversation. By the end of the evening, she had established that her firm was larger, her clients were more prestigious, and her role involved greater responsibilities than anything David had described about his own company. After David left that night, Victoria pulled me aside with an expression of sisterly concern that I had learned to distrust. "Elena, I hope you're being realistic about this relationship," she said in the patient tone she had used when we were children and she was explaining why my hopes were too high. "David seems nice enough, but his company is pretty small compared to established firms like Henderson and Associates. I just want to make sure you're not getting swept up in the romance without thinking practically about long-term financial stability." Victoria's comments about David's business reflected the same pattern of subtle undermining that had characterized her behavior toward my achievements throughout our lives. She never said anything directly critical enough to seem unsupportive, but she consistently found ways to suggest that my choices were naive or impractical compared to her more sophisticated understanding of how the world worked. As David and I began planning our wedding and discussing our future together, I made the decision to look for new career opportunities that would allow me to grow professionally and contribute more significantly to our shared financial goal. Morrison Associates was expanding rapidly, and David had mentioned that they were looking for a senior designer who could help develop their creative department and take on larger strategic projects. The position would represent a significant step up from my current role at Meridian Creative Solutions, involving not just design execution but creative strategy and client relationship management. It would also mean working closely with David, something we had discussed extensively and decided could strengthen both our professional and personal partnership if we maintained clear boundaries between work and home life. When I mentioned to Victoria that I was considering applying for a position at David's company, her reaction was immediate and predictably discouraging. "Elena, that sounds like a really bad idea," she said with the kind of concerned authority that suggested she was protecting me from making a serious mistake. "Mixing business with personal relationships almost never works out well. If things go badly at work, it could destroy your engagement. And if your relationship has problems, it could cost you your job. Plus, people will always wonder whether you got the position because of your qualifications or because you're sleeping with the boss." Victoria's objections touched on legitimate concerns about workplace relationships, but they were delivered with the kind of certainty that suggested she had already decided I was making a mistake rather than genuinely helping me think through the implications. More troubling was her assumption that I would be hired based on personal connections rather than professional merit, reflecting the same dismissive attitude toward my abilities that had characterized her behavior since childhood. Despite Victoria's warnings, I decided to apply for the senior designer position at Morrison Associates. David and I agreed that he would recuse himself from the hiring decision to avoid any appearance of favoritism, and that the interview process would be handled entirely by other members of the executive team. I spent weeks preparing my portfolio, researching the company's recent campaigns, and developing strategic recommendations for how they could expand their creative services. The application process was more rigorous than I had expected, involving multiple rounds of interviews, a comprehensive portfolio review, and a practical design challenge that required me to develop creative concepts for a hypothetical client campaign. I was competing against several other qualified candidates, including some with more senior-level experience than I had, which made the process genuinely competitive, rather than the formality I had worried it might appear to. During the final interview process, I learned that one of the other candidates being considered was Victoria herself. She had apparently applied for the position after learning about it through industry networking, viewing it as an opportunity to move from account management into a more senior strategic role that combined marketing and creative oversight. The discovery that I would be competing directly against my sister for the same job added a new dimension of complexity to an already challenging situation. Victoria's application for the same position created an unprecedented level of direct competition between us, something that had never happened during our careers since we had worked in different sectors of the marketing and design industry. For the first time, we would be evaluated side by the same hiring committee, using the same criteria for the same role. The situation forced both of us to confront the professional dynamic that had shaped our relationship since childhood. When Victoria learned that I was also interviewing for the position, her reaction revealed the depth of competitive resentment that had been building over years of subtle undermining and dismissive comments. "Elena," she said during a phone call that began innocuously but quickly became tense, "I hope you understand that this position requires senior-level marketing experience and strategic thinking skills that go far beyond design execution. I've been working in marketing strategy for years, managing major accounts and developing integrated campaigns for national clients. This isn't really an entry-level design job." Victoria's comments reflected her assumption that she was inherently more qualified for any business role, regardless of the specific requirements or my own professional development over the past several years. She seemed unable to consider the possibility that my design expertise, combined with my growing experience in creative strategy and client relationships, might make me a strong candidate for a position that specifically required someone who could bridge creative and business objectives. The interview process extended over several weeks, during which Victoria and I both prepared extensively while maintaining an increasingly strained pretense of family civility. We attended a cousin's birthday party, where we sat at the same table making polite conversation about wedding planning and career transitions, while internally preparing to compete against each other for the same professional opportunity. During family conversations, Victoria continued to position herself as the more experienced and qualified candidate, while suggesting that my application was somewhat presumptuous given my background in design rather than marketing strategy. "I think it's great that Elena is interested in expanding her career," she would say to relatives who asked about our respective interviews, "but this particular role really requires someone with extensive experience in account management and strategic planning. It's quite a bit different from the creative work she's been doing." Victoria's comments were calculated to reinforce the narrative that had shaped our relationship since childhood. She was the serious professional with real business skills, while I was the creative dreamer whose ambitions exceeded my practical qualifications. Even as adults competing for the same job, she couldn't resist the opportunity to position herself as the inherently superior candidate, based on her assumptions about the relative value of marketing experience versus design expertise. The interview process itself was conducted with scrupulous fairness by Morrison Associates executive team. David had indeed recused himself from all hiring discussions, and the evaluation was based entirely on portfolio quality, strategic thinking ability, and cultural fit with the company's collaborative approach to integrated marketing campaigns. Both Victoria and I presented our qualifications, completed the same design challenges, and answered the same questions about how we would approach the creative and strategic aspects of the role. What I hadn't anticipated was how Victoria would use the interview itself as an opportunity to undermine my candidacy through subtle comments about my experience and qualifications. During the group interview session where all final candidates presented their strategic recommendations, Victoria found ways to reference her superior experience and to suggest that other candidates, particularly those with primarily design backgrounds, might struggle with the business development aspects of the role. "I think one of the challenges this position will face," Victoria said during her presentation, "is ensuring that creative decisions are always aligned with broader marketing objectives and client business goals. Sometimes designers can get caught up in aesthetic considerations without fully understanding the strategic implications of their choices. This role really requires someone who can bridge that gap by bringing extensive account management experience to the creative process. Victoria's comments were diplomatically phrased enough to avoid seeming like direct attacks on other candidates, but they were clearly designed to highlight what she viewed as fundamental weaknesses in my background. She was using the interview process itself to reinforce her narrative about why marketing experience was inherently more valuable than design expertise for a role that specifically required both skill sets. During my own presentation, I focused on demonstrating how my design background had evolved to include strategic thinking about brand positioning, consumer psychology, and business objectives. I presented case studies from my work at Meridian Creative Solutions that showed how creative decisions had directly contributed to measurable business results for clients, and I outlined specific strategies for how Morrison Associates could expand their creative services while maintaining focus on marketing effectiveness. The contrast between Victoria's approach and mine reflected deeper differences in how we understood the relationship between creativity and business strategy. Victoria viewed design as a subordinate function that needed to be controlled and directed by marketing professionals, while I argued that the most effective campaigns emerged from genuine collaboration between creative and strategic thinking rather than hierarchical relationships where one discipline dominated the other. Following the group interviews, each candidate participated in individual sessions with different members of the executive team. These conversations allowed for more detailed discussions about specific experiences, career goals, and how each person's background would contribute to the company's continued growth and success. During my individual interviews, I was able to discuss my relationship with David openly and address any concerns about how our personal connection might affect workplace dynamics. The executive team appreciated my transparency about the potential challenges and my commitment to maintaining professional boundaries that would protect both my career and the company's interest. Victoria's individual interviews apparently focused heavily on her account management experience and her strategic approach to client relationships. She emphasized her track record of growing existing accounts and developing new business opportunities, positioning herself as someone who could immediately contribute to revenue generation and business development beyond just creative execution. The waiting period between completing interviews and receiving hiring decisions was particularly tense because Victoria and I both understood that only one of us would be offered the position. For the first time in our lives, our professional competition had moved beyond family comparisons and office politics to a direct, measurable contest where one sister's success would necessarily mean the other's disappointment. During this waiting period, Victoria's behavior toward me became increasingly strained as she struggled to maintain family politeness while clearly resenting that I was being seriously considered for a position she viewed as rightfully hers, based on her superior marketing experience. Our phone conversations became stilted and uncomfortable, with both of us avoiding direct discussion of the job while being unable to talk about anything else naturally. The tension reached a breaking point during a family dinner at our mother's house, where Victoria finally voiced her frustration with what she saw as an unfair competition. "Elena," she said after our mother had gone to the kitchen, leaving us alone in the living room, "I hope you realize that if you get this job, everyone will assume it's because you're engaged to the owner rather than because you're actually qualified. That's not fair to you, and it's not fair to other candidates who are being evaluated purely on merit." Victoria's comment was ostensibly about protecting my reputation, but it carried the clear implication that she didn't believe I could be hired based on qualifications alone. Even more troubling was her assumption that David's company would compromise their hiring process based on personal relationships, something that contradicted everything I knew about Morrison & Associates' professional culture and ethical standards. "Victoria," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm despite the anger building inside me, "the interview process has been completely fair and transparent. David hasn't been involved in any hiring discussions, and the executive team is evaluating all candidates based on the same criteria. If I'm offered the position, it will be because they believe my qualifications and experience make me the best fit for what they're trying to accomplish." Victoria's expression suggested that she found my confidence misguided rather than inspiring. "Elena, I'm not trying to discourage you," she said with the patronizing patience that had characterized her advice throughout our lives, "but you need to be realistic about what this position actually requires. It's not just about making pretty design, it's about understanding client psychology, developing strategic messaging, managing complex account relationships, and thinking about how creative decisions impact broader business objectives. Those are skills that take years to develop through hands-on marketing experience. Victoria's critique reflected her fundamental misunderstanding of how design work had evolved beyond simple aesthetic execution to include strategic thinking about user experience, brand positioning, and communication effectiveness. She was trapped in an outdated view of creative work as subordinate to marketing strategy, rather than an integral component of effective business communication. Our conversation ended without resolution, but it clarified something important about Victoria's perception of our competition. She genuinely believed that her marketing experience made her inherently more qualified for any business role, regardless of the specific requirements or my own professional development. She couldn't conceive of a scenario where design expertise, combined with strategic thinking and client relationship skills, might be equally or more valuable than traditional account management experience. 2 days after that uncomfortable family dinner, I received a call from Morrison Associates asking me to come in for what they described as a final conversation with the hiring committee. The timing and phrasing of the request made me hopeful that I was being offered the position, but I tried to manage my expectations, given how competitive the process had been and how qualified the other candidates were. The meeting was scheduled for Friday afternoon in the same conference room where I had completed my final interview presentations. When I arrived, I was surprised to see Victoria in the lobby, apparently also called in for a final conversation with the hiring committee. We exchanged polite greetings while both wondering whether this meant the company was planning to offer the position to one of us, or whether they were conducting final interviews with multiple candidates before making their decision. Victoria and I sat in the lobby making awkward small talk while waiting for our respective appointments, both of us clearly nervous about what we were about to learn. Despite years of sibling rivalry and professional competition, there was something surreal about sitting together in that corporate waiting area, knowing that one of our careers was about to change significantly while the other would be disappointed. When my name was called, I entered the conference room to find 3 members of the executive team seated around the polished table where I had presented my strategic recommendations several weeks earlier. Their expressions were professional but positive, suggesting that whatever news they had to share would be better than I had dared to hope. "Elena," said Jennifer Walsh, the company's chief operating officer, "we want to thank you for your patience during what has been a very thorough and competitive hiring process. We've been impressed by your portfolio, your strategic thinking, and your vision for how creative and marketing functions can work together more effectively." Jennifer continued with comments about my interview performance and the strength of my design portfolio, but I found myself focusing on her tone and body language rather than her specific work. Everything about the conversation suggested positive news, but I didn't want to assume anything until I heard a clear offer. "We'd like to offer you the position of Senior Creative Director," Jennifer said with a smile that confirmed what I had been hoping to hear. "The role will involve leading our creative team, developing strategic approaches to visual communication, and working closely with account managers to ensure that our creative work serves our clients' broader business objectives. We believe your background provides exactly the right combination of design expertise and strategic thinking that this position requires." The relief and excitement I felt were overwhelming, representing not just a significant career advancement, but validation that my professional development over the past several years had positioned me as a legitimate candidate for senior-level strategic role. More personally, it meant that I had succeeded in a direct competition with Victoria based purely on professional merit, rather than family connections or personal relationships. Jennifer outlined the details of the position, including responsibilities, reporting structure, and compensation that exceeded what I had been earning at Meridian Creative Solutions. The offer was generous and reflected the company's serious commitment to expanding their creative capabilities under leadership that could bridge design and business strategy effectively. As I accepted the position and discussed start dates and transition logistics, I couldn't help but think about Victoria sitting in the lobby waiting for her own conversation with the hiring committee. Despite years of her dismissive comments and competitive behavior, I felt genuinely sorry that her application hadn't been successful. I knew how much she had wanted this role and how difficult it would be for her to accept that I had been chosen over her for a position she had considered herself inherently more qualified to fill. When I left the conference room, Victoria was no longer in the lobby. I assumed she had already had her conversation with the hiring committee and learned that she hadn't been selected for the position. The receptionist mentioned that she had left a few minutes earlier, seeming upset but trying to maintain professional composure. I called Victoria that evening to share the news about my job offer and to acknowledge that I knew she had also been disappointed by the hiring decision. The conversation was awkward and painful, with Victoria struggling to offer congratulations, while clearly devastated that she had been passed over for a position she had expected to receive. "I'm happy for you, Elena," Victoria said with forced enthusiasm that couldn't entirely mask her disappointment and confusion, "though I have to admit I'm surprised by their decision. I thought my marketing experience would be more relevant for a senior strategic role, but I'm sure you'll do well with the creative aspects of the position." Victoria's comment revealed that she still didn't fully understand why she hadn't been selected, or what the hiring committee had valued about my qualifications versus her. She was attributing the decision to some kind of misunderstanding about the role's requirements, rather than recognizing that her assumptions about the superiority of marketing experience over design expertise had been incorrect. Our phone conversation ended with polite wishes for success and promises to celebrate together as a family, but the underlying tension was unmistakable. Victoria had experienced her first significant professional disappointment in a direct competition with me, and she was struggling to process what it meant about her career trajectory and her assumptions about our relative qualification. 3 weeks later, I started my new position as Senior Creative Director at Morrison Associates, beginning a role that would test everything I had learned about design, strategy, and leadership while working alongside the man I planned to marry in a few months. The professional challenge was exciting and intimidating, representing an opportunity to prove that the hiring committee's confidence in my abilities had been justified. David and I had spent considerable time discussing how to maintain appropriate boundaries between our professional and personal relationships, agreeing on communication protocols and decision-making processes that would protect both our working relationship and our engagement from potential conflicts of interest. The executive team had also been clear about their expectations for how we would handle any situations where personal and professional considerations might overlap. My first month in the new role involved learning about existing client relationships, understanding the company's creative processes, and beginning to implement strategic changes that would strengthen the integration between design and marketing functions. The work was challenging but rewarding, requiring me to draw on both my design background and the business knowledge I had accumulated through years of client relationships and strategic projects. Victoria, meanwhile, had continued her job search and eventually accepted a position with another marketing firm in Chicago. The role was similar to her previous position but with greater responsibilities and better compensation, representing career advancement even though it wasn't the strategic leap she had hoped for with Morrison Associates. Despite her professional disappointment, Victoria seemed to be adjusting to the reality that I had been successful in a competition she had expected to win. Our family interactions became more natural over time, though there remained an underlying awareness that our career trajectories had shifted in ways that challenged Victoria's assumptions about our respective professional capability. 2 months into my new position, Morrison Associates was invited to pitch for a major account with Pinnacle Retail Solutions, a national chain looking to rebrand their customer experience across multiple market segments. The project represented exactly the kind of integrated campaign that required close collaboration between creative and marketing strategy, making it an ideal test of how effectively our company could execute the kind of work my position had been created to oversee. The pitch process would involve multiple presentations to Pinnacle's executive team, including their CEO, marketing director, and regional managers responsible for implementing any new branding initiative. The project was large enough to significantly impact Morrison Associates' revenue and reputation, making it a high-stakes opportunity to demonstrate our capabilities to a prospective client with national reach and substantial budget authority. As Senior Creative Director, I would be responsible for developing the creative strategy and visual concepts that formed the foundation of our pitch, while working closely with account managers to ensure that our recommendations aligned with Pinnacle's business objectives and implementation requirements. The project required exactly the kind of strategic creativity that had convinced the hiring committee I was the right person for this role. During the preparation phase, I learned that Pinnacle Retail Solutions had also invited Henderson & Associates to submit proposals for their rebranding project. Henderson & Associates was the large marketing firm where Victoria worked, meaning that once again we would be competing professionally, this time as representatives of different companies rather than candidates for the same position. The discovery that Victoria's firm was also pitching for the Pinnacle account added personal stakes to what was already a significant professional challenge. If Morrison & Associates won the account, it would validate not just our creative strategy, but my leadership of the creative development process. If Henderson & Associates won, Victoria would have an opportunity to prove that her marketing approach was more effective than the integrated creative strategy I was advocating. I threw myself into developing creative concepts for the Pinnacle pitch with the kind of focused intensity that had characterized my most successful projects at Meridian Creative Solutions. The challenge was to create a rebranding strategy that would differentiate Pinnacle from competitors while remaining practical for implementation across hundreds of retail locations, with varying demographics and market conditions. The creative strategy I developed focused on authentic customer connection through locally relevant messaging that maintained consistent brand identity across different markets. Rather than imposing a single creative approach nationwide, I proposed a flexible brand system that could adapt to regional preferences, while maintaining coherent visual identity and strategic messaging. My approach required extensive research into Pinnacle's customer demographics, competitive landscape, and operational requirements. I spent weeks analyzing their current brand positioning, studying successful retail rebranding campaigns, and developing creative concepts that addressed both emotional connection and practical implementation challenges. The presentation itself would take place in Pinnacle's corporate headquarters, with multiple companies presenting their strategic recommendations to a decision-making committee that included senior executives responsible for marketing, operations, and financial planning. Each firm would have 90 minutes to present their approach and answer questions about implementation timeline, budget requirements, and expected results. As the presentation date approached, I felt confident about our creative strategy but nervous about the high-stakes nature of the pitch and the personal implications of competing against Victoria's firm. This would be my first major presentation as Senior Creative Director, making it a crucial test of whether I could succeed in the strategic leadership role that Morrison & Associates had entrusted to me. The morning of the presentation, David and I arrived at Pinnacle's headquarters together, both of us focused on the professional challenge ahead, while trying to manage the additional complexity of working together on such an important project. We had rehearsed our presentation extensively and coordinated our roles to ensure seamless delivery of both creative and business strategy components. As we entered Pinnacle's conference room, I was surprised to see Victoria already seated at the presentation table, apparently representing Henderson & Associates as their lead strategic consultant for the pitch. She looked professional and confident, dressed in a sharp business suit that projected exactly the kind of authoritative competence she had cultivated throughout her marketing career. Victoria's presence at the presentation added an unexpected emotional dimension to what was already a high-pressure professional situation. For the third time in less than a year, we would be competing directly against each other, this time in front of a client whose decision would have significant implications for both our careers and our respective companies. The presentation order had been determined by lottery, with Henderson & Associates scheduled to present first, followed by two other firms, and concluding with Morrison & Associates. This meant that Victoria would present her strategic recommendations before I had the opportunity to share our creative approach, potentially giving her insights into Pinnacle's questions and concerns that could inform our presentation. Victoria's presentation was polished and professional, focusing on market research, competitive analysis, and strategic positioning that emphasized Henderson & Associates' experience with large-scale retail campaigns. She presented data about consumer behavior, demographic trends, and implementation logistics, with the kind of authoritative confidence that had always characterized her professional presentation. What struck me most about Victoria's approach was how it reinforced traditional boundaries between marketing strategy and creative execution. positioning Henderson and Associates as strategic architects who would direct creative partners in implementing their recommendations. The approach reflected her long-standing view that marketing expertise should control creative decisions, rather than collaborating with design thinking as an integral component of strategic development. When Pinnacle's executives asked questions about creative implementation and visual identity development, Victoria's answers revealed the limitations of approaching branding as a primarily marketing-driven process. She could speak knowledgeably about messaging strategy and market positioning, but she struggled to address questions about how creative decisions would support strategic objectives, or how visual identity could enhance customer experience. As I listened to Victoria's presentation, I realized that our approaches represented fundamentally different philosophies about the relationship between creativity and business strategy. While she was advocating for marketing control over creative execution, our proposal would demonstrate how strategic creativity could drive business results more effectively than traditional hierarchical approaches. When our turn came to present, I felt the familiar combination of nervousness and excitement that accompanied high-stakes creative presentation. This was my opportunity to prove that the integrated approach Morrison Associates was advocating could deliver more effective results than traditional marketing-driven campaigns. My presentation began with analysis of Pinnacle's current brand positioning and customer experience challenge, but quickly moved into creative strategy that demonstrated how visual identity, messaging, and customer interaction could work together to create more authentic and effective brand connection. Rather than treating creative execution as subordinate to marketing strategy, I showed how strategic creativity could identify opportunities and solutions that purely analytical approaches might miss. The creative concepts I presented were grounded in extensive research about Pinnacle's customers and competitive environment, but they also demonstrated how innovative visual communication could differentiate the brand and enhance customer loyalty in ways that traditional marketing approaches couldn't achieve alone. I used case studies from previous projects to show measurable business results from integrated creative strategies. What differentiated our presentation from Victoria's was the demonstrated connection between creative decisions and business outcomes. While Henderson and Associates had presented marketing strategy as the foundation for directing creative partners, Morrison and Associates was showing how strategic creativity could drive marketing effectiveness and business results more powerfully than traditional approach. During the question and answer session, Pinnacle's executives focused extensively on implementation logistics, budget requirements, and timeline for rolling out new brand identity across their retail network. These questions allowed me to demonstrate not just creative vision, but practical understanding of how design decisions would affect operational requirements and financial planning. One executive asked specifically about how our creative approach would adapt to different demographic markets while maintaining brand consistency, a question that went to the heart of the flexible brand system I had developed. My answer demonstrated both strategic thinking and creative problem-solving that addressed their specific business challenges rather than imposing generic solutions. Another question focused on measuring the effectiveness of creative strategies and demonstrating return on investment for branding initiatives. This allowed me to discuss how integrated creative approaches could generate measurable improvements in customer engagement, brand recognition, and sales performance compared to traditional marketing-driven campaigns. As our presentation concluded, I felt cautiously optimistic about our performance while recognizing that the other firms had also presented strong strategic recommendations. The decision would ultimately depend on which approach. Pinnacle's decision came 3 weeks after our presentations, delivered through a conference call that would determine which direction their rebranding initiative would take. I was sitting in my office at Morrison Associates when Jennifer Walsh knocked on my door, with an expression that immediately told me we had won the account. The validation felt incredible, not just because it represented a major victory for our company, but because it confirmed that integrated creative strategy I had developed could compete successfully against traditional marketing approaches. The Pinnacle account became the foundation for everything that followed over the next several months. Working as senior creative director on such a high-profile project required me to coordinate with multiple teams, manage complex client relationships, and deliver results that would either establish my reputation as a strategic leader or reveal that I had been promoted beyond my capabilities. The pressure was intense, but it was also exactly the kind of challenge I had been preparing for throughout my career. David and I had developed effective protocols for working together professionally while maintaining our personal relationship. We scheduled regular check-ins to discuss project progress and potential conflicts of interest, and we made sure that other team members were comfortable with our dual roles as colleagues and romantic partners. The arrangement required constant attention to boundaries and communication, but it was working better than either of us had expected. Victoria's reaction to Morrison Associates winning the Pinnacle account was complicated and revealing. During a family dinner at our mother's house, she congratulated me with obvious effort, while struggling to understand how her firm's more traditional approach had been rejected in favor of what she still viewed as my less experienced creative strategy. Her confusion was genuine, reflecting deep assumptions about the relative value of marketing expertise versus design thinking that our competition had challenged. "I have to admit, Elena," Victoria said during a conversation that began awkwardly and became increasingly tense, "I'm surprised that Pinnacle chose Morrison Associates over Henderson. We have so much more experience with large retail accounts, and our strategic approach was based on extensive market research and proven methodologies. I'm curious about what factors influenced their decision." Victoria's comments revealed her continuing inability to understand why integrated creative strategy might be more effective than traditional marketing-driven approaches. She was attributing Pinnacle's decision to some kind of mistake or unusual circumstances, rather than recognizing that her assumptions about the superiority of marketing experience over design expertise had been challenged by actual business results. Our conversation about the Pinnacle account became a broader discussion about our respective career trajectories and professional philosophy. For the first time, Victoria seemed genuinely interested in understanding my approach to strategic creativity rather than simply dismissing it as less serious than traditional marketing work. The shift was subtle but significant, suggesting that repeated professional disappointments were forcing her to reconsider some of her long-standing assumptions. "Elena," Victoria said with uncharacteristic openness, "I've been thinking about our different approaches to this kind of work. Maybe I've been too focused on traditional marketing strategies without fully understanding how creative thinking can contribute to business strategy. Could you explain how you developed your approach to the Pinnacle project?" Victoria's question surprised me because it represented the first time she had ever asked for my professional insights, rather than offering unsolicited advice about my career choices. I spent the next hour explaining how strategic creativity involved understanding business objectives through design thinking, using visual communication to solve complex brand challenges, and developing creative concepts that could drive measurable business results. As I described my approach to the Pinnacle project, I could see Victoria processing information that challenged her fundamental assumptions about the relationship between creativity and business strategy. She asked thoughtful questions about research methodologies, client relationship management, and measuring the effectiveness of creative initiatives that suggested genuine interest in learning rather than looking for flaws in my reasoning. The conversation marked a turning point in our professional relationship, though I didn't fully understand the implications at the time. Victoria was beginning to recognize that creative strategy required sophisticated business thinking and analytical skills that complemented rather than competed with traditional marketing approaches. More importantly, she was starting to acknowledge that my career development had been more substantial and strategic than she had previously understood. Over the following months, the success of the Pinnacle campaign began generating additional opportunities for Morrison Associates and establishing my reputation within Chicago's marketing and design community. The integrated approach we had developed for Pinnacle became a model for other retail clients who were looking for more innovative and effective branding strategies than traditional marketing firms could provide. My role as senior creative director expanded to include business development activities, speaking engagements at industry conferences, and consultation on strategic initiatives that went beyond traditional design service. The professional recognition was gratifying, but it also required me to develop new skills in client relationship management, team leadership, and strategic planning that complemented my creative background. David and I became increasingly comfortable working together professionally while maintaining our personal relationship. Our engagement had strengthened rather than suffered from the additional complexity of workplace collaboration, partly because we shared similar values about professional integrity and partly because we had developed effective communication strategies for managing potential conflicts of interest. Planning our wedding while both of us were focused on expanding Morrison Associates created logistical challenges, but it also reinforced our commitment to building a life together that honored both our individual ambitions and our shared goal. We scheduled the ceremony for late fall, allowing time to complete the pinnacle project and establish stable routines in our respective roles before adding the complexity of married life to our professional partnership. Victoria, meanwhile, had been promoted to senior account director at Henderson & Associates, a role that reflected her continued success in traditional marketing strategy even as she was beginning to explore how creative thinking might enhance her approach to client relationships. Her questions about my work became more frequent and more sophisticated, suggesting genuine interest in understanding integrated marketing approaches rather than simply defending traditional methodology. During one particularly revealing conversation, Victoria admitted that losing the Pinnacle account had forced her to reconsider some assumptions about her career trajectory and professional capability. "Elena," she said with the kind of vulnerability I hadn't seen from her since childhood, "I've always assumed that my marketing experience made me inherently more qualified for senior strategic roles than people with primarily creative backgrounds. But watching your success with Pinnacle and other projects has made me realize that maybe I've been too narrow in my thinking about what strategic leadership actually requires." Victoria's admission represented a fundamental shift in how she understood our professional relationship and her own career development. For the first time since we were children, she was acknowledging that my achievements reflected legitimate expertise rather than luck or unusual circumstance. More importantly, she was beginning to question the assumptions about hierarchy between marketing and creative functions that had shaped her approach to professional relationships throughout her career. The change in Victoria's attitude created opportunities for genuine collaboration between us for the first time in our adult lives. When Henderson & Associates began exploring partnerships with design firms to offer more integrated services to their clients, Victoria reached out to ask whether Morrison & Associates might be interested in collaborative projects that could benefit both companies. The possibility of working together professionally was both exciting and terrifying, given our history of sibling rivalry and professional competition. David and I discussed the potential benefits and risks extensively, recognizing that collaboration with Henderson & Associates could provide access to larger clients, while also creating new opportunities for conflicts between Victoria and me to affect our respective companies. We decided to explore a pilot project that would allow both firms to test collaborative approaches without committing to extensive partnership agreements. The project involved rebranding for a regional healthcare network that needed both strategic marketing expertise and innovative creative approaches to differentiate themselves in a crowded market. Working with Victoria on a collaborative project required us to navigate professional dynamics we had never experienced before. Instead of competing against each other for the same opportunity, we were trying to combine our respective expertise in service of shared objectives. The adjustment was challenging for both of us, requiring new communication skills and a willingness to acknowledge each other's strengths, rather than focusing on perceived weaknesses. Victoria's marketing expertise proved valuable in ways I hadn't fully appreciated during our previous competition. Her understanding of healthcare industry regulations, insurance reimbursement systems, and patient demographics provided crucial context for developing creative strategies that would be both innovative and practical for implementation. She also brought client relationship skills that complemented my creative leadership in ways that made our joint presentations more effective than either of us could have achieved individually. The collaborative project succeeded beyond our expectations, resulting in a comprehensive rebranding strategy that satisfied both the client's business objectives and their need for creative differentiation in a competitive market. More importantly for Victoria and me, the experience proved that we could work together professionally when we focused on shared goals rather than competitive dynamics. The success of our collaboration led to additional joint projects between Morrison & Associates and Henderson & Associates, creating a formal partnership agreement that allowed both companies to offer more comprehensive services to clients who needed integrated marketing and creative strategy. The partnership was structured to ensure that both firms maintained their independence while creating opportunities for collaboration on projects that could benefit from combined expertise. As our professional relationship evolved into genuine partnership, Victoria and I began developing personal friendship that had been impossible during our years of constant competition. We discovered shared interests beyond work, including appreciation for contemporary art, passion for travel, and commitment to supporting other women in marketing and design fields. The friendship felt fragile at first, built on unfamiliar territory of mutual respect, rather than the competitive dynamics that had defined our relationship since childhood. David proposed expanding our partnership with Morrison Associates to include joint marketing initiatives that would promote both companies' expertise in integrated campaigns. The proposal made business sense, but it also meant that Victoria and I would be representing our respective firms at industry events, conferences, and client presentations, where our personal relationship would be visible to the broader professional community. The prospect of public professional collaboration with Victoria felt like the ultimate test of whether we had truly moved beyond the sibling rivalry that had shaped our relationship for so long. We would be evaluated not just as individual professionals, but as representatives of successful collaboration between marketing strategy and creative thinking, making our personal dynamics relevant to our company's reputations and future business opportunities. Our first joint presentation at a major industry conference was scheduled for early spring, giving us several months to develop content that would showcase the benefits of integrated marketing approaches while demonstrating effective collaboration between traditionally separate business functions. The presentation would be attended by potential clients, industry leaders, and competitors who would be evaluating both our strategic recommendations and our ability to work together effectively. Preparing for the conference presentation required Victoria and me to develop shared frameworks for discussing the relationship between marketing strategy and creative execution. We spent hours discussing case studies, analyzing successful campaigns, and developing examples that would illustrate how collaboration could produce better results than either marketing or creative work could achieve independently. The preparation process revealed how much we had both learned from our previous competitions and collaboration. Victoria had developed greater appreciation for how creative thinking could enhance strategic planning, while I had gained deeper understanding of how marketing expertise could provide crucial context for creative decision-making. Our approaches had evolved to complement each other rather than compete for dominance. As the conference date approached, Victoria and I felt cautiously optimistic about our presentation while recognizing that public speaking about professional collaboration would test our partnership in new ways. We had developed effective working relationships on client projects, but presenting our approach to industry colleagues would require us to articulate our professional philosophy and defend our methods against skepticism from people who preferred traditional approaches to marketing and design services. The conference presentation went better than either of us had expected, generating positive responses from audience members who were interested in exploring similar collaborative approaches with their own teams and partner organizations. Several potential clients approached us afterward with questions about how integrated marketing strategies could address specific challenges they were facing in competitive markets. More gratifying than the business opportunities was the personal satisfaction of successfully representing our partnership to industry colleagues who had known both of us individually for years. People who had observed our previous professional competition were surprised and impressed by our ability to collaborate effectively while maintaining our individual expertise and professional identity. The success of our conference presentation led to additional speaking opportunities and consulting projects that required Victoria and me to continue developing our collaborative approach to integrated marketing strategy. We began co-authoring articles for industry publications, participating in panel discussions about innovation in marketing and design, and advising other companies about implementing similar partnership models. As our professional collaboration became more visible and successful, it also began affecting our personal relationship in unexpected ways. Working together effectively required us to communicate more openly and honestly than we ever had as siblings, addressing conflicts directly rather than allowing resentment to build over time. The improved communication skills transferred to our family interactions, making holidays and gatherings more enjoyable for everyone. David observed that the partnership with Victoria had made me more confident and relaxed in ways that extended beyond professional settings. Having a genuinely supportive relationship with my sister rather than constantly managing competitive dynamics freed emotional energy that I could invest in other relationships and personal interests. The change was subtle but significant, affecting how I approached challenges and opportunities in all areas of my life. Victoria seemed to be experiencing similar benefits from our improved relationship. She appeared more open to new ideas and less defensive about her professional choices, suggesting that the constant need to prove her superiority over me had been as exhausting for her as managing her competitiveness had been for me. Our family noticed the change, commenting on how much more enjoyable family gatherings had become now that Victoria and I were genuinely supportive of each other's success. Our mother was particularly pleased by the transformation in our relationship, having spent years trying to mediate conflicts and encourage mutual support between her daughters. During one family dinner, she commented that watching Victoria and me work together professionally had given her hope that we had finally outgrown the competitive dynamics that had concerned her since we were children. The partnership between Morrison and Associates and Henderson and Associates continued expanding throughout the summer, creating opportunities for both companies to pursue larger clients and more complex projects than either could handle independently. The collaboration was generating measurable business results while also establishing both firms' reputations as innovators in integrated marketing approaches. As Victoria and I became more comfortable with professional collaboration, we also began discussing longer-term goals for our partnership and our respective career trajectory. Victoria expressed interest in eventually starting her own consulting firm that would specialize in helping traditional marketing companies integrate creative strategy into their service offering. I was exploring opportunities to expand Morrison and Associates' creative services into new industries and markets where integrated approaches could provide competitive advantages. Our discussions about future plans revealed how much our professional ambitions had evolved as a result of working together. Instead of viewing career success as a zero-sum competition where one sister's achievements diminished the other's opportunities, we were beginning to see how our combined expertise could create possibilities that neither of us could achieve individually. The shift in our relationship also affected how we approached conflicts and disagreements in professional settings. Instead of viewing different opinions as threats to be defeated, we learned to see them as opportunities to develop more comprehensive and effective solutions to complex business challenges. The change made our collaborative work more productive while also improving our individual decision-making skills. David and I scheduled our wedding for October, timing the ceremony to coincide with the completion of several major projects and beginning of what we hoped would be a more stable period for both our professional partnership and our expanded collaboration with Henderson and Associates. The wedding planning had been remarkably stress-free, partly because we shared similar values about celebrating our commitment without excessive financial or logistical complexity. Victoria offered to help coordinate wedding logistics, a gesture that would have seemed impossible just a year earlier when our relationship was still primarily competitive. Her assistance was genuinely helpful rather than an attempt to control or improve upon our plans, reflecting the mutual respect that had replaced our long-standing sibling rivalry. As the wedding date approached, I reflected on how dramatically my professional and personal life had changed over the past year. The job at Morrison & Associates had provided opportunities for career growth that exceeded my expectations, while my partnership with David had proven that professional and romantic relationships could enhance each other when built on shared values and clear communication. Most surprisingly, my relationship with Victoria had evolved from a source of constant stress and competition into genuine friendship and professional collaboration. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, but through a series of challenges and opportunities that forced both of us to reconsider our assumptions about each other's capabilities and intentions. The wedding itself was a celebration not just of David's and my commitment to each other, but of the broader changes in relationships and professional opportunities that had shaped the past year. Victoria served as my maid of honor, a role that symbolized how far we had come from the competitive dynamics that had defined our relationship since childhood. During her maid of honor speech, Victoria acknowledged the journey we had taken from sibling rivalry to professional partnership, expressing gratitude for the opportunity to discover her sister as a colleague and friend rather than just family obligation. Her words were heartfelt and specific, referencing particular moments when my professional expertise had impressed her and admitting that her previous dismissiveness had been based on insecurity rather than accurate assessment of my capability. The wedding reception included colleagues from both Morrison and Associates and Henderson and Associates, creating an opportunity for our professional communities to celebrate not just our marriage but the successful partnership between our companies. Several clients mentioned how much they had benefited from integrated marketing approaches that combined strategic thinking with creative innovation. David's wedding speech included comments about how working with me professionally had deepened his respect for my expertise, while also strengthening his confidence in our personal partnership. He described how our collaboration had made both of us better professionals, while also creating a foundation for marriage that was based on mutual understanding of each other's values and ambition. As David and I began married life while continuing to work together professionally, we faced new challenges in balancing personal and professional responsibility. The transition required ongoing attention to communication and boundary setting, but it was facilitated by the trust and respect we had developed through months of successful collaboration on complex projects. Our honeymoon provided an opportunity to step away from work responsibilities and focus entirely on our personal relationship, something we hadn't been able to do during the intense months of project deadlines and business development that had preceded our wedding. The break was refreshing and necessary, giving us perspective on how much we had accomplished professionally, while also clarifying our priorities for the future. When we returned from our honeymoon, Victoria approached me with a proposal that would take our professional collaboration to a new level. Henderson and Associates was considering acquiring a smaller design firm to expand their creative capabilities internally, and Victoria suggested that Morrison and Associates might be interested in a merger that would combine our company's expertise under unified leadership. The merger proposal was both exciting and terrifying, representing an opportunity to create something entirely new while also risking everything we had built individually. David and I spent weeks analyzing the financial and strategic implications, consulting with lawyers and accountants to understand how such a merger might affect our respective companies and our personal relations. Victoria's proposal reflected her evolved understanding of how marketing and creative strategies could enhance each other when integrated effectively rather than maintained as separate functions competing for client budgets and decision-making authority. She had developed a vision for a company that could offer seamlessly integrated services, rather than forcing clients to coordinate between separate marketing and design firms. The merger discussions revealed how much trust Victoria and I had developed through our successful collaborative projects. Instead of approaching negotiations as competitive adversaries trying to maximize individual advantages, we focused on creating structures that would benefit both companies while maintaining the cultural values that had made our partnership successful. After extensive analysis and negotiation, we decided to proceed with a merger that would create a new company combining Henderson and Associates marketing expertise with Morrison and Associates creative capabilities under shared leadership structure that recognized both firms' contributions to the combined organization. The merger would be completed over several months, allowing time to integrate teams, align processes and develop unified approaches to client relationships. The announcement of our merger generated significant attention within Chicago's marketing and design community, partly because of the company's respected reputations and partly because of interest in how family relationships would affect professional collaboration at the executive level. Industry observers were curious about whether Victoria and I could maintain effective working relationships when family dynamics were combined with high-stakes business decisions. Victoria and I addressed questions about family and professional dynamics directly, acknowledging the challenges while emphasizing the advantages of shared values and complementary expertise that had made our collaboration successful. We described our approach to managing potential conflicts and our commitment to maintaining professional standards that would protect both our business relationship and our family connection. The merger process required months of detailed planning and coordination, including integration of staff, alignment of client relationships, and development of new service offerings that would leverage the combined expertise of both firms. The complexity was overwhelming at times, but it was also exciting to be creating something entirely new that could serve clients more effectively than either company could independently. As the merger neared completion, Victoria and I reflected on the journey that had brought us from childhood competition through professional rivalry to genuine partnership and family reconciliation. The transformation hadn't been easy or predictable, requiring both of us to challenge fundamental assumptions about our capabilities and our relationship to each other. The new company would be called Rodriguez Morrison Strategic Solutions, acknowledging both our family heritage and our professional partnership, while positioning the firm to serve clients who needed integrated marketing and creative service. The name represented compromise and collaboration rather than dominance by either partner, reflecting the values that had made our merger possible. Opening day for Rodriguez Morrison Strategic Solutions felt like the culmination of everything Victoria and I had learned about professional collaboration and family relationships over the past 2 years. We had created something that neither of us could have achieved individually, while also discovering that supporting each other's success was more rewarding than competing for individual recognition. David would serve as Chief Operating Officer for the new company, bringing his entrepreneurial experience and strategic planning skills to help manage the complexity of integrating two established firms into a unified organization. His role would allow him to work closely with both Victoria and me, while maintaining clear boundaries between our family relationships and our professional responsibility. The success of Rodriguez Morrison Strategic Solutions would depend on our ability to maintain the collaborative culture that had made our partnership effective while scaling up to serve larger clients and more complex projects. The challenge was significant, but we felt confident that the foundation we had built through smaller collaborations would support the expanded scope of our merged organization. As I stood in the lobby of our new headquarters on that first morning, greeting team members from both companies who were now working together for the first time, I thought about how different my life had become from what I had imagined just 2 years. The professional success was gratifying, but the personal growth and family reconciliation were even more meaningful. Victoria approached me that morning with coffee and a smile, asking if I was ready for whatever challenges our first day as business partners might bring. Her question was casual, but it reflected the genuine partnership we had developed through months of collaboration and the trust we had built by choosing to support each other's success rather than compete for individual advantage. The transformation from sibling rivalry to business partnership hadn't eliminated all sources of conflict between Victoria and me, but it had given us frameworks for addressing disagreements constructively rather than allowing them to escalate into personal attacks or professional sabotage. We had learned that our different perspectives and approaches could enhance our combined effectiveness rather than requiring one of us to dominate the other. Looking ahead to the challenges and opportunities that Rodriguez Morrison Strategic Solutions would face in its first year, I felt cautiously optimistic about our ability to succeed both professionally and personally. We had built something significant together, proving that family relationships could enhance rather than complicate professional partnerships when based on mutual respect and shared commitment to excellence. The merger was just the beginning of what Victoria and I hoped would be a long and successful collaboration, but it represented the end of the competitive dynamics that had defined our relationship since childhood. We had discovered that supporting each other's success was more rewarding than individual achievement and more sustainable than constant competition for family approval and professional recognition. The morning everything changed started like any other Tuesday at Rodriguez Morrison Strategic Solutions, with Victoria and me reviewing client proposals over coffee in the conference room that had become our unofficial strategies. 6 months into our merged company's operations, we had developed comfortable routines that balanced professional efficiency with the personal connection that made our partnership unique in Chicago's competitive marketing landscape. Victoria was explaining concerns about a potential client whose demands seemed unrealistic when my assistant Marcus knocked on the glass door with an expression of barely contained excitement. "Elena," he said, trying to maintain professional composure while obviously bursting with news, "there's someone here to see you. She says she's from Northbrook Creative Agency, and she's asking about employment opportunity." The name Northbrook Creative meant nothing to me initially, but Victoria's face went completely white at the mention of it. She set down her coffee cup with trembling hands and stared at me with an expression I couldn't immediately interpret. It was somewhere between panic and resignation, with undertones of something that looked disturbingly like guilt. "Victoria," I said carefully, watching her reaction with growing concern, "do you know something about Northbrook Creative that I should be aware of?" Victoria's response was barely audible, delivered in the kind of shaky voice that precedes major confessions or devastating news. "Elena, there's something I need to tell you about what happened during our interview process at Morrison Associates last year. Something I should have mentioned months ago, but I was too ashamed to admit what I had done." The weight of her words settled over our morning planning session like a sudden storm, transforming what had been a routine business discussion into something that felt potentially catastrophic for both our professional partnership and our personal relationship. Victoria's obvious distress suggested that whatever she was about to reveal would be significant enough to threaten everything we had built together. "When I applied for the senior creative director position," Victoria continued, her voice gaining strength but still carrying obvious shame, "I wasn't just competing against you based on qualifications and experience. I did something deliberately cruel that I've regretted every day since then, but I was so convinced that I deserved the job more than you did that I justified behavior that was completely unethical." Victoria explained that during the final interview process she had learned through industry contacts that David Morrison was the CEO of Morrison Associates, the same David that I had mentioned as my fiancé during family conversation. Instead of recognizing this as information that might affect the hiring process, Victoria had seen it as evidence that my candidacy was based on personal connections rather than professional merit. "I convinced myself," Victoria said with obvious self-disgust, "that you were getting unfair advantage because of your relationship with David, and that someone needed to level the playing field by making sure the hiring committee understood that your qualifications weren't as strong as they appear. I thought I was protecting the integrity of the selection process, but really I was just jealous and angry that you might succeed in a competition I expected to win." The confession that followed was more devastating than I could have imagined. Victoria described how she had used the final interview session to subtly undermine my candidacy by questioning my strategic thinking abilities, suggesting that my design background hadn't prepared me for senior leadership responsibility, and implying that my enthusiasm for the position was based more on personal considerations than professional interest. More damaging than her direct comments about my qualifications was Victoria's systematic effort to plant doubts about my professional judgment and business acumen. She had referenced projects from my portfolio in ways that emphasized potential weaknesses rather than achievements, questioned my understanding of client relationship management, and suggested that my integrated approach to marketing and design was naive rather than innovative. "The worst part," Victoria said, tears beginning to form in her eyes, "was that I presented all of this concern about your candidacy as coming from a place of sisterly love and professional responsibility. I told the hiring committee that I was worried about you being set up for failure in a role that might be beyond your current capabilities, and that I hoped they would consider all candidates based purely on professional readiness rather than personal connection." Victoria's manipulation of the interview process was sophisticated and calculated, designed to appear helpful while systematically destroying my credibility with the decision-makers who would determine whether I received the position. She had used her knowledge of my background and her assumptions about my relationship with David to create a narrative that portrayed me as unqualified and potentially problematic as an employee. What made Victoria's confession even more shocking was her admission that she had continued these efforts even after learning that David had recused himself from the hiring process to avoid any appearance of favoritism. Rather than recognizing that the competition was genuinely merit-based, Victoria had doubled down on her campaign to undermine my candidacy by suggesting that David's recusal was merely symbolic and that family pressure would ultimately influence the decision. "Elena," Victoria said, now crying openly, "I need you to understand that my behavior during that interview process was the worst thing I've ever done to another person, let alone my own sister. I was so threatened by your success and so convinced that I was inherently more qualified for business leadership that I lost all sense of ethics and family loyalty. I tried to destroy your career because I couldn't bear the possibility that you might be more successful than me." The revelation that Victoria had actively sabotaged my candidacy during the Morrison Associates interview process recontextualized everything I thought I understood about our professional competition and our subsequent collaboration. Her failure to receive the position hadn't been a simple case of the hiring committee preferring my qualifications over hers. It had been the result of her own unethical behavior being recognized and rejected by executives who valued integrity over manipulation. Victoria's confession also explained why she had been so surprised and confused when I was offered the position despite her efforts to undermine my candidacy. The hiring committee had apparently seen through her manipulation and recognized it as evidence of poor professional judgment rather than legitimate concerns about my qualifications. Her attempted sabotage had backfired, damaging her own reputation rather than mine. The woman from Northbrook Creative, Victoria continued with obvious dread, is Jennifer Walsh, who was part of the hiring committee at Morrison Associates. She left the company 6 months ago to start her own firm, and apparently she's been asking questions around the industry about my behavior during various interview processes. I think she's here to offer you information about what I did, or possibly to warn you about working with someone who would betray family members for professional advantage. The irony was devastating and perfect. Victoria's attempt to sabotage my career had been witnessed by someone who was now in a position to expose her unethical behavior to our current business partners and clients. The very manipulation that was supposed to prevent my professional success was about to become the foundation for destroying everything Victoria had built since then. As Victoria finished her confession, I felt a complex mixture of anger, betrayal, and surprisingly, relief. The anger was obvious and justified, given the calculated cruelty of her attempt to destroy my career during the most important job interview of my professional life. The betrayal cut even deeper, representing not just professional sabotage, but a fundamental violation of the family loyalty that our mother had always emphasized as our most important value. But the relief was unexpected and profound because Victoria's confession finally explained the strange undercurrents I had sensed during our recent collaboration. Her excessive enthusiasm for our partnership, her willingness to defer to my creative judgment, and her consistent efforts to prove her loyalty and support had all been motivated by guilt over what she had done during the Morrison Associates interview process. Victoria, I said after several minutes of silence during which she sat across from me crying and waiting for whatever consequences her confession might bring, I need to understand something important. When you decided to partner with me professionally and personally over the past year, was that motivated by genuine respect for my abilities, or was it an attempt to make up for what you had done during the interview process? Victoria's answer was immediate and seemed genuinely honest. Both, she said without hesitation. I was motivated by guilt about what I had done, but working with you over the past year has also shown me that everything I believed about your professional capabilities was wrong. I tried to sabotage your career because I was threatened by your talent and potential, but our collaboration has proven that you're actually more skilled and innovative than I ever gave you credit for. Victoria explained that watching me succeed as senior creative director at Morrison Associates had forced her to confront the reality that her attempts at sabotage had been based on jealousy and insecurity rather than accurate assessment of my qualifications. My work on the Pinnacle account and other major projects had demonstrated strategic thinking and leadership abilities that contradicted everything she had told the hiring committee about my supposed limitations. Elena, Victoria said with the kind of desperate honesty that comes from having nothing left to lose, I know that what I did was unforgivable, and I know that you have every right to end our partnership and our relationship over this. But I need you to know that everything we've built together over the past year has been the most meaningful and successful period of my professional life. Working with you has made me a better person and a better professional, and losing that would be devastating. The conversation was interrupted by Marcus returning to inform us that Jennifer Walsh was still waiting and asking whether she should schedule a formal meeting or if this was something that could be handled with a brief conversation. The decision about how to manage this situation would have immediate implications for our business, our partnership, and our family relationship. I asked Marcus to bring Jennifer Walsh to our conference room, recognizing that whatever information she had to share needed to be addressed directly rather than postponed until we had time to develop strategies for damage control. Victoria agreed, though she was obviously terrified about what Jennifer might reveal and how it might affect our company's reputation. Jennifer Walsh entered our conference room with the confident bearing of someone who knew she held significant information about a situation that could have major consequences for everyone involved. She was well dressed and professional, but there was something in her expression that suggested she was here for more than casual networking or business development. "Elena," Jennifer said after exchanging polite greetings, "I'm here because I believe you deserve to know something about what happened during the Morrison Associates hiring process last year. As someone who was part of that decision-making process, I feel obligated to share information that might affect your current business relationships and professional decisions." Jennifer's opening statement confirmed what Victoria had already confessed, but hearing it from an independent source added weight and credibility to accusations that might otherwise seem like family drama or personal conflict. Jennifer had been present during the interview process as Chief Operating Officer, and her perspective would carry significant influence if she chose to share it with others in the industry. During the final interview process, Jennifer continued, directing her comments to me while occasionally glancing at Victoria, "Your sister made several statements that were clearly designed to undermine your candidacy for the senior creative director position. She questioned your strategic thinking abilities, suggested that your relationship with David Morrison created conflicts of interest, and implied that your enthusiasm for the role was based on personal rather than professional consideration." Jennifer described Victoria's behavior during the interview process in detail, explaining how the hiring committee had recognized her comments as unprofessional and potentially unethical rather than legitimate concerns about my qualification. Victoria's attempts at sabotage had actually strengthened my candidacy by demonstrating the kind of competitive pressure and professional jealousy that my work would apparently inspire from less secure colleagues. What particularly concerned the hiring committee, Jennifer said, looking directly at Victoria with obvious disapproval, was that you presented your undermining comments as coming from a place of sisterly concern and professional responsibility. Using family relationship as cover for professional sabotage suggested character issues that made us question your integrity and judgment as a potential employee. Jennifer explained that Morrison and Associates had decided not to pursue Victoria's candidacy further after observing her behavior during the final interview process, but they had chosen not to share the specific reasons for their decision to avoid creating professional embarrassment or family conflict. The company had simply informed her that other candidates were better fits for the position without elaborating on the ethical concerns her interview behavior had raised. "Elena," Jennifer continued, "I'm sharing this information now because I've heard through industry contacts that you and Victoria are business partners, and I believe you should know about her previous behavior when making decisions about professional trust and collaboration. I'm also here because Northbrook Creative is expanding our team, and we'd be interested in discussing opportunities for someone with your strategic creativity and ethical stand." Jennifer's job offer represented an unexpected opportunity to escape the complications of working with Victoria while also advancing my career with a firm that apparently valued the professional integrity that Victoria had attempted to compromise. The timing was particularly significant, coming immediately after Victoria's confession and providing a potential path forward that wouldn't require me to continue managing the trust issues that her sabotage had created. Victoria sat in stunned silence as Jennifer outlined the position at Northbrook Creative, which would involve leading their strategic creativity division and developing integrated marketing approaches for clients who needed innovative solutions to complex branding challenges. The role would provide greater autonomy and potentially higher compensation than my current partnership arrangement, while also removing the complexity of working with someone who had betrayed my trust so fundamentally. When Jennifer finished her presentation and left to allow me time to consider her offer, Victoria and I sat alone in the conference room facing the most critical decision our relationship had ever required. Everything we had built together over the past year was now threatened by the revelation of her earlier betrayal, and the path forward was unclear. "Elena," Victoria said quietly, "I know that I have no right to ask for forgiveness or to expect you to continue our partnership after what I've confessed, but I want you to know that working with you has been the most rewarding experience of my professional life, and losing you as a partner would be devastating both personally and professionally." Victoria's acknowledgement of her wrongdoing was complete and seemed genuine, but it couldn't change the fact that she had attempted to destroy my career at its most vulnerable moment. The question was whether the person she had become through our collaboration was sufficiently different from the person who had sabotaged my interview to justify continuing our partnership despite her betrayal. The decision I made in that conference room would determine not just my own career trajectory, but the future of our family relationship and the company we had built together. After everything Victoria and I had overcome to reach this point, her confession had created one final test of whether forgiveness and trust could overcome betrayal and competition. I looked at my sister, seeing both the person who had tried to destroy my dreams and the partner who had helped me build something greater than either of us could achieve alone. The choice was mine, and whatever I decided would define the rest of our life. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.